Welcome to the tutorial for our May 2025 Hoop Club box, where we are stitching this quilted bow inspired embroidery design. My name's Chloe and I run Cotton Clara, and Hoop Club is our subscription box. I'm going to take you through everything that's in the box, and then I'm going to take you through the project step by step and show you how, right from putting your fabric into your hoop to stitching all of the stitches and then finishing off your hoop. I'm also going to show you how you stitch some of the little extras that we've put in your box. So I'm going to talk about the stick and stitch that we've put in the box, and I will do a little tutorial for the drop shadow cross stitch alphabet hoops that we've put the pattern for in your magazine. So there are no materials for that. You have the pattern, and I'm going to show you how to stitch that project as well. So let's go through what we have and what you're going to find when you open your box. We have your fabric, which is printed with the design as much as possible to help you with where all the different stitches go. We have, I've already cut this one up, some stick and stitch transfers. So this is sticky fabric, and you stick this onto whatever you want basically to stitch onto, and then it kind of acts as a stabilizer as well. So that is sticky. You add that to a t-shirt, say, or I'm going to do some napkins, and then you stitch over it, and then once you finish stitching you wash the stabilizer away with water. And it's just a really good way of being able to stitch designs and not have to rely on drawing them out or transferring them. So you've got a whole set of bows. We have got a pin cushion. I love these pin cushions or needle cushions. Everyone has a different design, so it's going to be totally random what design you get. There are lots of different ones. Then we have all of our beautiful thread. I just love the colour palette for this box. It's so lovely. This yellow is so gorgeous with all of the rest of these colours. You're going to have loads of leftover thread, so great idea is to use it on these. And then we've got our instruction booklet. So we've got the whole project set out here. We've got a diagram showing which stitch goes where. We've got diagrams of all the different stitches and photos and description. And in here also you have got the pattern for our drop shadow alphabet hoops, which is one of our long-time best-selling kits, and it's really versatile. You can stitch one in a hoop, or you could stitch a few together on a bigger piece of fabric. So that is a little treat for you as well. That's going to keep you busy for the whole 3 months up until the next box. And then of course you have your hoop, wadding and backing disc and your needle. So that is everything that's in your box. Now we're going to start with the project. So we'll start by getting our fabric nice and tight in the hoop. So unscrew your hoop, and if you had our lemon box, I think it was the lemon box, we included a little screwdriver, and this hoop has actually got the little screwdriver hole in, so you can use your little mini screwdriver if you got that in one of the previous boxes to tighten the hoop, because sometimes it's quite difficult to tighten it with your hands and you want it as tight as possible. So I'm trying to get my design as central as possible in the hoop. But don't worry if it's not, because you can always move it around afterwards. And now I'm going to tighten the screw fastening, and I'm going to try and get it as tight as possible. I'm going to alternately tighten the fastening and then gently tug, because what you don't want to happen is for the design to get warped and distorted because you've tugged it so tight. So you have to be quite gentle and do a little kind of process of tugging and tightening to get it to be tight but not warped. So I've just grabbed my handy mini screwdriver, holding onto the nut or the bolt and tightening, which is so much easier to do with a little mini screwdriver. So you want that to be really nice and tight like a drum, and that is going to be the perfect starting point for our project. Once you're happy that your fabric is tight in your hoop, we're going to get some thread on our needle. If you find the right loose end to pull from the long end of the paper fastening, you can generally pull out your thread without tangling up the whole skein. Now, if you've not embroidered before, we use varying amounts of strands for our stitching. So each strand is made up of 6 smaller strands, and we split these depending on how thick we want the line to be of our stitching. So we're doing some satin stitch and we need 3 strands, so I'm taking 3 on each side, and I'm just going to slowly pull them apart. And then thread your needle with that thread. Don't double knot. The main mistake lots of people make is they knot both of the ends together, but you want to leave a little tail and then just knot one end of the thread. Otherwise you're essentially stitching with 6 strands, which would be too thick. So I always tie a few knots in the bottom, and then we're going to start work, and we're going to start with the satin stitch checkerboard. So we're going to be doing satin stitch to make this little checkerboard design, and the way I've done it is I've gone vertically with the red and horizontally with the cream, just to give it a little bit more interest. So we're going to start by stitching vertical lines along the top left hand box. They don't have to be perfectly next to each other. I like to do satin stitch by gradually building up the lines of stitching next to each other. So this will be my first run, and then I'll go back and fill in the gaps, and it will gradually form that satiny, smooth finish that we're after. So I've gone over it a second time, I'm going to go back a third time just to make sure it's lovely and full of stitches. So a bit closer for you so that you can see what I'm doing. Trying to keep the outline of that square as much as I can by where I place my stitch. But you can see my line is not perfectly straight. I'm trying to look for gaps now and fill those in. Just try and keep your stitches vertical and aligned and not at an angle. I'm happy with that. That's my third run. You could go on and make it even more satin-like and padded. So the way you would do it I would do all of your red squares while you've got that thread on your needle. Don't tie off your red and then start a cream. Do all of the red squares and then come back and start with the cream. But I'm just going to show you the cream, which I'm sure you don't need me to show you. But we're just going horizontally with our satin stitch. Try not to pull the thread from the back through. So we always give you a size 1 /2 embroidery needle, which is the biggest embroidery needle you can get, because we like to make threading the needle, which is one of the things people tell us they find the most difficult about embroidery, as easy as possible. You can get smaller embroidery needles. The bigger the number, the smaller the needle. So as you're kind of advancing and getting better at embroidery, you may want to reduce the size of your embroidery needle just to give you a bit more precision. It makes a smaller hole in the fabric, so you can just be overall a bit more delicate with your stitches. I quite like a chunky needle. So I'm just doing exactly the same as I did, trying to keep my shape as square as I can and adding in horizontal stitches. So just keep going until you're happy that your space is filled and it's as padded and full as you want it to look. So that's the checkerboard square. Now we're going to jump to the couching, because this is so fun. So this is the couching. This is couching. Couching. So I'm going to show you how you do this. I have got 6 strands of pink on my needle, and I'm going to come up at the top, because we're doing this one with vertical lines. I'm going to come up with my pink. Keep pulling this cream. Come up with my pink, and then I'm going to take the needle off, and I'm going to get some navy blue. I'm just going to get 1 strand of the navy blue and come up with that one at the same point that I've come up with my pink. So as close as I can to this pink, I'm coming up with my blue thread, and the blue thread is the one that we're going to be holding the thicker thread down with. So I'm just using my left hand to hold the thread in the direction that I want it to go, and then I'm going to start at the top just by making a first stitch over that thread, and then I'm going to go down kind of 3 or 4 millimeters and make the next stitch. And I'm just trapping the thick thread with a little stitch over the top. I'll try and get in closer to show you that. I'm just coming up and then going back down over my thread, and it secures it next to the fabric. So as you come to the end, you want to make sure that you have placed the stitch right at the end, so that when you return your thread the opposite direction, it covers the whole of the length of the shape and doesn't turn back up with you, if that makes sense. Turn back up when you... So if I hadn't have done that stitch right at the end, the thread would have curled up too early. So now what we're going to try and do are some kind of lines that intersect those large pieces of pink thread. So it's kind of like a brick, building a brick kind of pattern. So you're holding the thread as close to the previous one as possible. Coming up with your needle and going back down in between those now 2 lengths of thread that are lying next to each other, And I'm going to just stagger my stitches so that they fall in between the last ones. And this, I think it's so fun because it looks really cool, but it works up really quickly as well. So you can fill a whole square of fabric really quickly with thread. And again, I'm just going to do a final stitch right at the top so that when I turn back, my thread stays where I want it to. I'm using an embroidery stand, and we do sell these. They are useful when doing stitches like this and when doing things like French knots. So I'm coming back down. What I'm going to do is get my stitch ready first and then lay my fabric down, lay my thread down. So I'm holding it flat and then I'm going in at a staggered position. And that is couching. So you can use it in lots of different ways to fill areas of colour like this, but you can also use it to write. It looks really nice when you use it as a script in embroidery. And you can use any thread as well. This is the kind of beauty of couching, is that you can use threads that are maybe too thick to embroider with or too fancy to embroider with, but you can lay them down, or even kind of ribbon. But anything you can kind of lay flat and is in a long string, you can use to couch. So I'm going to lay my thread down so I know where my stitch needs to come up. And then just go down. Pulling it tight just to make sure you've got it nice and flat. And that is couching. And at the end, what you'll do is re-thread your needle back onto your pink and then just go down at the end with your pink thread and tie a knot at the end, at the back, just as you normally would. And I will demonstrate tying your thread off at the back as well for any first-time embroiderers who need that, a little demonstration of that. But just carry on like this, very happily, laying the thread down and filling your shape. Making sure you do a final little stitch at each end to keep the thread nice and flat and staying put. Even though I haven't finished, I'm going to show you how we finish off. So I'm going to go down here, just threaded my pink back onto the needle. The blue is already through, and then I'll turn it over and I'll show you how we tie a knot off at the back of our work. So I've got both threads at the back, and I'm just going to take them both together. And this is how I tie off threads at the back. I make a loop and then place my finger on the end of that loop so that you're going to try and get the knot to form as close to the fabric as you can. And I quite often do a double one, just to be sure, holding the loop so that you get it to tie off as close as you can to the fabric, and then trim off the ends. And like you'll have seen happening with my work, unless you keep your ends trimmed at the back, you will just start to pull through random threads and it will be really annoying. So keep it all nice and neat at the back and trim off any excess threads. Now we're going to look at basket weave stitch, which is this stitch that we've worked in cream here and here, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So I've got 4 strands of ecru thread and I'm going to make vertical lines all the way down the length of this corner shape. So I'm just bringing my thread up and going down. And fairly close together. Said about 1 millimetre. Kind of leave a thread's width. We can experiment with leaving different widths to see what different effect you get. Don't pull it too tight because we're going to be weaving back through these threads. So just fill this shape with vertical stitches. So I've got my threads, my vertical threads already, and then we're going to start to make our horizontal stitches. So pull your thread up at the bottom and then we're going to go over and under each individual thread. So you can do a few at a time, but I wouldn't suggest trying to do the whole run. And as you're doing it, kind of just like you would if you were weaving, push your threads down. You can use the blunt end of the needle if you want, if you find it easier. I find it easier to use the sharper end. And then once you get to the end, we're just going to take the needle down and finish off that line. And then we're going to come up again, but this time we're going to go under, over, basically the opposite way from the way we came first. So I'm going under, over, under, pulling it through, making sure I'm bringing it down. And you'll be able to see if you're getting it right, because you'll start to see the weave forming. So at the end of each run, just use your kind of needle or your nail to pull it down and then secure at the end. And so by keeping on doing this, we just create this lovely basket weave effect. So over, under, Now we're going to look at split back stitch. So we use split back stitch on a few different areas in a couple of ways. So this diagonal stripe is split back stitch. We've got 2 lines of stitching next to each other to create the diagonal. And then this is split back stitch too, but here we've gone around the edge of the shape and just gradually in to fill the shape. So there's two different ways we use it. This is split back stitch as well. So I will just show you the two different ways. So I've got three strands of navy blue on my needle. And I'm going to start with a navy stripe. So I'm just going to come up and make my first stitch, which will be about 2 or 3 millimeters long. And then I'm going to come up again about the same distance, maybe 2 millimeters away from that first stitch. And instead of going back down at the end of that last stitch, which would be a normal back stitch, I'm going to go down right in the middle of that last stitch. I'm going to split it, which is why this is called split back stitch. I'm going to come up again and just keep doing that. Keep returning the thread into the middle of the previous stitch. So it creates a thicker line than if you were doing a split back stitch, a back stitch. Gives you a nice chunky line, and it almost looks a little bit like chain stitch, I think, when you've finished. So it's quicker to fill areas with split back stitch because it's a bit of a thicker stitch. So then each of these diagonals is stitched using 2 lines of split back stitch together. So once I've done that first line, I'll just come back and lay another line next to it. So the printed lines are there to guide you. So again, I've done 1 line of navy. You would then carry on doing your navy lines and then come back and fill in with the white lines. So while you've got navy blue on your needle, do all your navy lines and then come and fill it in with white. Okay, now we're going to look at long and short stitch. I've got 3 strands of the sage green on my needle, and long and short stitch is a great stitch for filling areas that are a little bit too big to fill with satin stitch, because satin stitch can become baggy if you try and use it on a too big an area. So what we're going to do is work kind of top to bottom, and our first row of stitches are going to be long and short stitches. So I'm going to alternate their size as I go along. I'm going to make my second stitch half the size of the first one. But you can decide how long or how short you want them to be. So I've got my whole row of long and short stitches now, and now the stitch, confusingly, turns into just the same size the whole way down. So what we're going to do is add in now consistently sized stitches into the ends of each of the long and short stitches, so it will remain staggered, but each of the stitches you're stitching is going to be the same length. So, but because we're stitching into shorter and longer stitches, it will remain, this kind of staggered pattern will remain. So I'm going to make my stitches 2 to 3 millimeters, and just like split back stitch, I'm going to go into the end of the stitch. So I'm going to split it at the end. You could probably make your stitches a bit bigger than mine just to give yourself a chance, if this is your first time doing it, of just being able to see where each stitch goes a bit clearer. And they're a bit bigger. But we're just splitting the end of each stitch and moving along the row. And then you will just keep doing this until we get to the last row, when we will do staggered stitches again, long and short stitches again, to finish off, to fill the shape. Now if you're thinking, oh, this is a bit of a faff, it is a bit of a faff, but it does give you a different effect. And if you get fed up with it, you could always just use split back stitch to fill these shapes. So as you get to the end, we've got this sloped shape pattern, you're just going to need to adjust the size of your stitches to just finish off where you need it to finish off. So keep doing your rows as far as you can, and then when you get to an end, just complete the stitch with whatever size stitch that needs to be to allow your stitches to fill that shape. One little tip that might help you with this is to go along and do all of your long stitches first and then go back and do all of your short stitches. I actually find my head can cope with that a little bit better than going from long to short, and it helps me keep that kind of consistent size as I'm doing my stitches.